Hello, and welcome to an interview and reading by Silver Bow Publishing author Scott Taylor, who will be doing a sample reading from two of his novels. The first one is Screwed, and the second one is Chasing Your Tail. My name is Megan Hakkinen. I'm a writer, adventure cyclist, and today's host. These books are available to purchase worldwide at local retail bookstores or the Silver Bow Publishing website. I'll hand it over to Scott to kick things off with his first reading from Screwed. Scott, welcome.
Thank you. The next morning, the alarm went off. Holy shit, Ralph said, spinning around and flinging the pillow into space. He got up and made coffee, even stronger than usual. It was becoming more and more difficult to wake up in the morning. Off to work he went. The traffic was unthinkably bad. There was no end in sight in any direction. Ralph entertained thoughts of getting out of the car and just leaving it there, getting out and simply walking off in a random direction, come what may. But he didn't do it. It was 8 o'clock at night on Tuesday. Gina had called twice. He hadn't answered. Then someone had buzzed the front door. He didn't feel like dealing with anyone's shit that night, and he'd be damned if anyone was going to force him into it. Suddenly, he heard banging on the fire escape outside the window. "I know you're in there, bastard. I can see the light on," came a muffled voice from outside. Gina was coming up the ladder. "Cut the shit, Gina. Okay, I'm coming down," he said through the closed window. He watched her climb back down again and then went downstairs to let her in. "Why don't you ever answer the phone, you shithead?" she asked as she sat down. "Because then I'd have to talk to you," Ralph said, getting a beer. "Dude, why don't you ever get me one?" she whined at him. "Get it yourself," he said. She tried to kick him as he collapsed on the couch. "I got laid the other night," Gina said, smirking to herself and playing with her hair. "Good for you," Ralph said, trying to ignore her and watch TV. There was a movie on, some oldie about the CIA and Ruski spies or something. "He wasn't bad looking either, better looking than you at least," she said. Ralph glared at her over the top of the beer can. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Because I'm bored," Gina said. "What about the new boyfriend? Why don't you go bother him?" "He's not my boyfriend. All I said was I got laid." "So what's wrong with him?" "Nothing's wrong with him. Shut the fuck up." Thankfully, there was a lull in the conversation. It lasted about a minute and a half, which was pretty much the limit with Gina. "You guys are going to Willie's on Friday, right?" she asked. "Yes," Ralph replied. "Let me come with you," she said. "No," he said. "Come on, Ralph, I'll be good. I won't start any trouble or anything." "No, Gina." "Why not?" "Because you're a pain in the ass." "Come on, Ralph, don't be an asshole." Gina worked on him for another few days, calling him constantly to bug the shit out of him about it. Finally, he relented and said she could go with him. Gina let out a little yip of glee over the phone. On Friday night, they all piled into his car and drove over to the bar. Larry tripped on the door sill again as they went in. "I'm going to get you a seeing eye dog," Ralph said to him over his shoulder. "Gina, how you doing there?" asked Henry with a broad smile as they sat down. "Haven't seen you in here in a long time." "Yeah, I know, Henry. Asshole over here never lets me come. He's too good for me or something," Gina replied. Henry came over with the drinks. "So what's up, Larry?" Gina asked, giving him a friendly slap on the back. "Nothing, Gina. How you doing?" Larry said. Larry and Gina had always gotten along pretty well. "Staying out of trouble, you know," she replied. "Got laid the other night." "Hey, congratulations," Larry said, clinking beer bottles with her. "I know that's a real accomplishment for you." "Oh, fuck you," Gina said, laughing. Ralph was trying to stay out of the whole thing. Having Gina there made him distinctly nervous. He looked around the room at the rather sparse crowd that had gathered there. The jukebox was playing something mellow, and there wasn't a whole lot going on. His eyes came back to rest on Frank as he sat to Gina's left, listening to the conversation. Frank's eyes were glazed over, and he had a dreamy expression on his face as he watched her babble with Larry. For Christ's sake, the little fucker had a crush on Gina. He'd never noticed it before. After a while, Gina noticed too. She turned to give Frank a big welcoming smile. "Why can't you guys be gentlemen like your friend Frank over here?" she asked, basking in the attention and fixing him with a big, oily, come-hither look. Frank beamed. "Oh, Lord," Ralph thought, fidgeting around. "I'm going to puke if they keep this up." "Hey, I'm a gentleman too," Larry objected. "I just hide it better than he does." Ralph and Larry were back at Willie's again the next night, this time by themselves. "Fucking Frank has the hots for Gina," Ralph grumbled into his beer. "Yeah, I know," Larry said matter-of-factly, not bothering to look over. Ralph's eyes widened. He was taken aback. "You know?" "Everybody knows. He was staring there the entire 3 months you guys were dating. You're the only one who didn't know." "Did fucking Gina know?" Ralph stammered. "Dunno," Larry said. Ralph went back to his beer, stewing in his juices. "You gotta be shitting me," he said after a while. I wouldn't worry about it, Larry said, staring at the TV. Gina can never go out with someone who doesn't speak. It would drive her crazy. Yeah, but she could still fuck him, Ralph said, glowering. Involuntary visions began dancing in his head. The mere possibility of it was highly disturbing. Nah, Ralph decided after careful internal deliberation. Gina hadn't fucked Frank. She would have said something to him if she had. Her mouth had a mind of its own. Ralph went home and sat on the floor again with the shades down and the lights out. He'd been drinking for 2 days and his head hurt. The next time Gina came up the fire escape, he was going to dump a pot of water on her head. He went to work on Monday morning. Half the place was sick. There was some kind of Ebola going around. They were running up against a deadline, and Ralph sat there all morning, typing away like mad, trying to get the work done. Max came by. You finished yet? He's asking about it again, Max said. No, I'm almost done, Ralph responded, still typing. He said they need it by noon at the latest, Max said. Well, go in there and tell Darth Vader the Death Star's not in position yet, Ralph said angrily over his shoulder, waving him away. An hour later, Max came by to check again. Then a few minutes later, the Grim Reaper followed him into the cubicle. The stench of his breath preceded him. It was like a noxious vapor. God damn, Ralph said, screwing up his face and recoiling like he just inhaled a skunk. Dude, we bought you the Listerine. It's like chemical warfare, Max added. Ha ha, I know. That was a good one with the Listerine, said the Reaper, chuckling. No, we were actually serious, though. You're supposed to use it, Max said. Look, it's still not ready yet, Ralph said, anticipating the complaint. No, I know. Never mind about that, the Reaper said. I came by to introduce you guys to my boss. He's here today, and he says he'd like to meet you. The boss of bosses came striding down the aisle. He was a pretty boy with hair carefully coiffed and pearly teeth gleaming. He wore Giorgio Armani suits from like 8 different countries, and his shoes shone like the sun and the stars. Everything about him was perfect. Just the sweat from his earlobe was a magnificence. The Grim Reaper was bent practically in half with unctuous, hand-wringing pleasure. Ah, Mr. Wilkinson, may I present 2 of my finest programmers, Ralph Sanders and Max Edgar, the Reaper said with a theatrical wave of his hand. The boss strode further forward with great confidence and enthusiasm. Mike Wilkinson, he said when he'd reached them, shaking their hands vigorously and smiling from ear to ear like a pumpkin. A real pleasure to meet you. Mr. Wilkinson's handshake was a thing of beauty, made at the optimal angle and with just the right amount of grip strength. His hands were manicured and his watch was heavy. An exotic fragrance emanated from him, something that smelled properly expensive. His eyebrows were carefully trimmed and his belt buckle glittered like gold. Mike Wilkinson aimed to impress. I've heard a whole lot of good things about you fellas, Mr. Wilkinson said, his rictus undiminished as he continued to pump away at Ralph's hand. You've done some quality work for us, quality work, and I'm fully confident that it will continue well into the future. The intensity of Mr. Wilkinson's smile actually increased as he went on, if that were possible. Ralph began to imagine the man's face splitting open at the seams, the flesh pulling away from his skull and liquid magma oozing from the newly formed fissure. Mr. Wilkinson was so successful it almost appeared life-threatening. Well, I'm afraid I've got to be going. A real pleasure to have met you both, Mr. Wilkinson said. He gave the Grim Reaper a winning smile of his own, turned on his heel, and marched back up the aisle. That was quite the opportunity for you, the Reaper said once he'd gone. Mr. Wilkinson doesn't visit here all that often. My life has been changed forever, Max said with a skeptical raised eyebrow. Nothing will ever be the same. The Reaper laughed. Ha ha, you guys are too much, I'll tell you what. Ralph was too demoralized to comment, to respond, or to move. Eventually, he trudged back into his cube and sat down praying for death, or at least that they'd all go away. And his wish was granted, but not for long. Udarsh came calling shortly after lunch. So I came over to get a status on that module you've been writing, the one that was due last week, Udarsh said sourly. Oh, don't you start, Ralph said, disgusted. Max, he called over the cue wall. Can you come over here? I'm going to need a translation again. I can't believe you have to do this each and every time. Why can't you just give me a simple answer for once? Udarsh was instantly irate, his upper lip quivering as he stood with his hands on his hips. Ralph sat there gaping at him, shaking his head dismissively. Unbelievable, he said. I don't know how you function. I mean, how do you order takeout? What if someone calls you on the phone when you're at home? Udarsh stared back, grinding his teeth and getting more frustrated by the second. I know damn well you know what I'm saying, you son of a bitch. Everyone else can understand me just fine. I told you about 1,000 times already. Max came over to sort things out, and Ralph was soon left in peace once more. The rest of the day lasted about a week. When he got home that night, Ralph had a throbbing headache, so he drank about 8 beers and tried to go to sleep. That place was going to kill him. It was only a matter of time. He lay there in bed, imagining what it would be like to wrap his fingers slowly around Udarsh's neck and just squeeze. He'd squeeze for about 3 days. He'd squeeze until they pulled him off and the cops came to get him. Then he pictured himself sitting despondently with the other inmates in some jail cell, waiting for Larry to come and bail him out. He continued to be amazed that he'd yet to see the inside of one. They went to Hoboken on Friday night. It was 6 o'clock and they were sitting at a table eating pizza at a place on Washington Street, just screwing around until it was time to drink. The girl from Ipanema came on the radio. That's like some fancy Mexican shit or something. What is that? Larry asked after listening to it for a while. The girl from Ipanema, Ralph said with his mouth full. Never heard it before. You grew up under a rock. They finished eating and went down the street. You never heard that song before, admit it, Larry chided Ralph as he walked a few steps behind him. Dude, it's like the most famous song ever made. They play it on the Light FM stations about once an hour, in the elevators and everything. Light FM, my ass, Larry laughed, mocking him. You've never heard that song before in your life. They weren't even singing in English. Yes, they were too fucking singing in English. Were you even listening to it? Ralph spat, immediately tense. You're so full of shit. Frank, have you ever heard that song before? Frank shrugged his shoulders. He wasn't sure. Ralph was growling audibly. He was friends with two of the greatest nitwits of all time. Larry was still making noise behind him, droning on and on about absolutely nothing. In his mind's eye, Ralph pictured himself suddenly producing a megaphone, spinning around and screaming, "Shut the fuck up!" at him in a gravelly megaphone Satan voice. It would feel so satisfying to do it just once. Larry, I'm going to hit you, he informed him instead. Go ahead, tough guy. They stopped in at one of the trendy bars along the way. Ralph had been horny for weeks now. He had to get laid soon. But it was too early. The birds were all still in their nests. A beer would have to do for now. They stayed in Hoboken until past midnight. No one hooked up or got laid. They stood around drinking beer and having a generally miserable time. The kids got younger and younger, and Ralph got older and older. He was starting to feel like someone's father or something. Past 10 o'clock or so, and the bartenders now looked at him like he should be somewhere else. What did you do when you were old and wanted to have fun? The prospects didn't look promising. The following day was his mother's birthday. He had to call. There was no choice. He picked up the phone and dialed. Hello, his mother said. Happy birthday, Ma, Ralph said. Well, it's about time, she shrieked. Why haven't you called? He hung up. That's it.
Thanks for sharing some of your new release, Scott. Before we jump into the next reading, I just have a couple of questions for you. So first thing, could you tell us a bit about what inspired this novel?
Well, this one was strange. It was sort of based on a set of notes that I've been keeping for a screenplay that I was thinking about writing. But the screenplay never got written. And as time went on, I was starting to write novels. So I figured maybe I would just try making a novel out of it and put the notes together. And there were some ideas in there that I thought were funny. I thought it would make for a good comedy. And it just kind of went from there. It's supposed to be a screenplay, but it never made it.
Well, I think it's transformed really well into a novel, and I think that's the thing that writers do is we're creative. We put things together and make things happen. So
Yeah.
I guess next I'm just wondering, what role does humor play in your writing?
I probably include more of it. I mean, I'm not just a straightforward humor writer, but I probably do more of it than most writers. I mean, I kind of feel like it's a sweet spot of mine. I stay pretty close to home with that, and I come back to humor as an element in a lot of novels. So Screwed really was just an attempt at just straightforward comedy. It's just really a vehicle to get laughs. Chasing Your Tail, which was the novel before, it was more of an attempt to intertwine drama and humor and make more of a more mature work, if you want to say that. But I like to go back to the question. I love writing dialogue. People have told me I have an ear for it, and I have more fun writing comedy than anything else. It's enjoyable.
Well, it's great to get some of your insights there. Well, I'll pass things back to you so that we can hear a bit more from the novel you just mentioned, Chasing Your Tail.
Thanks. A few days later, I was at work. The cube farm was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The lights were sizzling down as always, broiling us in boredom. Greg came over. Listen, man, we got to get our asses in gear. The witch is pushing for that new code by end of day tomorrow. How are you making out? I wasn't making out at all. I barely even looked at it, but I didn't say that to Greg. I just kept staring. What the hell are you staring at? Greg asked. You're always staring into her office. She's not even that good looking, and she's old. I mean, what the hell are you thinking? I redirected my stare from the office to him. Why are you always coming over here to bother me? I asked him. It was an honest question, one attempting to elicit an actual answer, but he just laughed it off instead. Come on, it's lunchtime. We went to the elevator, got in the elevator, rode the elevator down, got out and walked across to the cafeteria. I knew the way by now. Greg had taken the lead as he always did, walking just in front of me with the same old bounce in his step he always had. It appeared Greg actually liked going to work. He wanted to be an architect, as in the computer version. That was supposedly the next step up the chain for guys like us. It was his mission in life to become an architect. That and have a great big family with like 7 or 8 children and a big house to fill up with them. Greg had really gotten with the program lately. He'd already successfully completed the first step, which was to find the wife. The marriage had been about 6 months earlier at a place out on Route 17, closer in towards the city, over by where my parents lived. I'd met his new wife only a few times. I didn't like her very much, and the feeling was reciprocated. We were both just tolerating each other for Greg's sake, and for my part, I wasn't sure why we were even doing that much, as I didn't really like him either. I mean, he was okay. He was a friend of mine, but he bothered me a hell of a lot, and sometimes I figured it was better just to stay home and watch TV or something. I was getting more and more like that in my old age. We got our food and sat down. Seriously, do you have the hots for Christine? He asked mid-munch. No, I said. I was lying, I did. Christine was my boss. She was a couple of years older than I was. She was thin and slightly attractive with long black hair and pale white skin. She was also a bit of a wacko. That was understating it considerably, to be honest. She yelled and screamed all the time, all day long. With the hair and the pale skin and all, she actually looked something like a witch, which was rather apropos considering the circumstances. She had a few screws loose for sure. Everybody steered well clear of her for the most part. She'd throw these tantrums and they'd all just run for cover. But it didn't bother me at all, not in the slightest, as a matter of fact. I had a thing for aggressive chicks, always had. It was kind of like my cross to bear, I guess you could say. Greg didn't know this about me, and I wasn't about to tell him. Very few people knew. She's too old for you. That and she's your friggin' boss. That and she's a total bitch on top of it. There's a reason why she isn't married yet. You do realize that, don't you? I didn't answer. Greg sat there with his patented quasi-manic bulbous-eyed stare, big teeth gleaming like daggers recently polished and filed. He looked like a shark. His eyes were always popping right out of his head, and when he smiled, it got even worse. One of these days, he was going to get too excited and they were going to explode. Jeannie and I are going to the game on Sunday. Want to come? Which game? The Giants game. Greg was a diehard Giants fan. He told me about 1,000 times, but I always forgot. I wasn't into sports. No, thanks. I got stuff going on. You do not. No, I do. I got to go see my folks. They invited me over for dinner. Looking forward to that, are you? More shark tooth smiling. He knew all about my parents. Yeah. I went home that night and made dinner, a TV dinner thing I popped in the microwave. I ate a lot of frozen food in general. I ate pizza. I ate McDonald's. I wasn't going to last the week. I figured something was going to kill you. It might as well be your diet. That, and I had no idea how to cook. That probably had something to do with it as well. After dinner, I sat down to write. Same spot as always, hunched over that flimsy little desk of mine, prepared to put some immortal words down on paper. The problem was they never came. I'd been waiting for about 3 years for them to come, and they never came. I figured I'd been through enough by now and that it was high time to get started. High time for those immortal words to come pouring out of me like sweat, to go gushing like a veritable fountain of inspiration, flooding first my room and then the world with the undeniable force of my burgeoning brilliance, but no dice. It just never seemed to happen. So many stories to write, so many things to say, so many words to use, so many goddamn combinations to try. The options were limitless. They were too limitless. There once was a cat. There once was a dog. There once was a man who knew too little. There once was a frog that sat upon a log. There once was a woman who loved too much. There once was a man who knew too little. There once was a prince. There once was a prostitute. There once was a goddammit, it never ever worked. 3 years of endlessly waiting, night after night, spent propping up that stupid little desk in the corner, perched there like a monk in prayer, poised in penitent spiritual penury, waiting for the thunderbolt to strike. 3 years of silence, 3 years of ineptitude, 36 months of shame, 1,095 days of utter futility. It was enough to make you just throw in the towel and die. Will was going to get discovered soon, and I'd be left behind, left there to eat his dust. The mere possibility of it rankled beyond bearing. It was success or bust, success or death, failure not an option, in spite of the fact that I was currently swimming in it. God was testing me, yeah, that was it. He just wanted to see me suffer a bit first, wanted to watch me squirm. Then once I'd paid my dues, it would be clear sailing, all blue skies and sunshine for miles. It was just a matter of time, I knew that. I knew it deep down in the depths of my achy, breaky heart. Soon the words would start flowing. Soon the tales would start growing. Soon my talent would be showing. Soon the winds of change would be blowing. Someday my prince would come. But enough was enough. Let him come soon. If he didn't, I was going to go out and find the son of a bitch and murder him in his sleep. So it was more of the same that night. I sat there and did basically nothing. I typed up a few hundred words, that was it. Really crappy stuff, unoriginal, boring as hell. It put me to sleep just to type it. I went to the fridge and got myself a beer, grumbled my disgruntled ass through it, and packed myself off to bed. The calendar had turned another page. I was another day older, and still nothing had happened. This is what finished guys like Van Gogh off. This is what put the shotgun in Papa Hemingway's mouth. This is what put the poets in their early graves. I wasted Saturday doing nothing as well. The next day was Sunday. I had to go have dinner with my folks that night. I sat around all day just thinking about it, dwelling on the possible repercussions. Dealing with my folks oftentimes felt like a near-death experience. You got out of there wiping the sweat from your brow, feeling like you just barely made it out alive. 7 o'clock rolled around. Shit, time to go. There was no getting around it. I got in the car and fought my way eastward, crawling down the highway, braving the angry urban hordes, the packs of wild animals trapped in their metal cages, ready to kill over an inch of space. Always a pleasure. It took almost an hour to go 10 miles, and then I was there. My father was waiting for me at the door. About time, he said. My father was a smartass. He thought the same of me. He told me so on numerous occasions. The difference was that he could get away with it because he had lots of money, whereas I did not and therefore could not. You could run your mouth all you wanted when you had lots of money. My dad had taught me that. Okay, the rest of the world had helped too. Anyway, there we were in the living room, my mother, my father, and I. My brother Jake was still upstairs. Just being in the room with them was entirely nerve-rattling. The three of us squared off, preparing to do battle. So how are things going, my father said, like it was an opening statement. They were sitting on the couch. I was sitting in the chair, the big armchair in the corner, the one right next to the grandfather clock. They're going, okay, I said. I remained tense and nervous. Talking to my father always felt like some kind of interrogation. The job is still going all right? Yep, it's all right. I had a bottle of beer in my hand, which my dad had just given me. Dad was drinking scotch and Mom was drinking wine. It was happy hour. This was the hour when everyone had drinks together and pretended they were happy. Happy hour was a daily obligation, like some sort of staged performance we were all forced to take part in. We did it the same way every single time, no deviations possible, no ad-libbing of any kind. Switching any part of the routine would have been like committing a crime. Dad always drank the same scotch in same quantities out of the same glass, and my mother did the same with her wine. The conversations were always the same, the topics never varied. The words that were used and the ways in which they were spoken were so predictable you could have written them out beforehand in a script. It was also stuffy and formal, and no one ever really appeared to be enjoying themselves. I didn't know why they even did it. My mother sniffed the air dryly. Are you still thinking about getting that new apartment? She asked. She didn't like the apartment I was in. It was a bit on the ratty side, and she clearly didn't approve and enjoyed telling me all about it every chance she got. Everything was about money with my mother, always had been, always would be. She was more obsessed with money than my father was, which was saying a lot, something I always found funny considering the fact that it was really my dad's money. He was the one who actually made it. He made the money, she figured out how to spend it. I was never getting married. Yes, I'm still thinking about it, I said. I wasn't and never had been. I just said it to get her off my back. You need to get a better job, otherwise you'll never be able to afford anything better. I don't know why you took that horrible apartment in the first place. I didn't respond to that one. It was just another argument waiting to happen, and I wasn't going to take the bait. Anyway, the answer was obvious. One followed the other. A shitty job led to a shitty apartment. Case closed. Not too hard to figure out, really. My dad did some more talking, and then Jake came downstairs. He dragged himself across the room and sat down in the opposite corner, shambling like some creature from the swamp. He looked about the same as always, which is to say not so good. Jake was depressed, had been since the beginning of time. How's the supermarket? I asked from across the room, just for something to say. Okay, he said. Jake worked in a supermarket. He bagged groceries, pushed the carts around for old ladies and things. Good to hear, I said. No further response. That was all he was going to say unless I made the effort to pull more out of him. And I wasn't prepared to make said effort, and so that was that. We could all just sit there and look at the floor for all I cared. About an hour later, we were all sitting at the dining room table eating our dinner. We were having steak and potatoes to be exact, filet mignon and baked potatoes to be even more exact. Steak was Dad's favorite. It was just about all he ate. Filet mignon and more filet mignon like there was no tomorrow. There was a social status associated with eating steak, primarily based on the fact that you could afford to buy it. I could tell it made him feel successful to eat it, privileged, elite, a member of the club. I sensed a conspiracy whenever we ate steak, like I was a traitor to the common man. My dad was one of those guys, you know the type, the one who smoked cigars, who played golf, who followed the stock market. The country, the world, and everything else made perfect sense to my father. He was the world's most contented human being. As such, he made absolutely no sense to me. I often wondered what the point of these little get-togethers was. You were talking about maybe getting a new car, too, weren't you, Jim? My dad said. Everyone was busy tucking in, knives and forks clinking, jowls flexing, mouths masticating. It was a regular feast. Nah, I think the old one is doing just fine, I said. It's as old as the hills, my mother said. It's 5 years old, I said. This is what I was talking about. What was the point? Jake here is getting a promotion, Mom said, pointing her hooded glare at her younger son, frowning at the hair all hanging in his eyes. It's not a promotion, it's a raise, Jake mumbled. Well, either way, we're very proud of him, Mom said. She patted his arm and went back to her food. My father remained non-committal. Anything short of a corporate takeover was unlikely to produce much of a reaction. I weathered the rest of the storm, parried my way through a few more uncomfortable minor disagreements, and then was on my way. I worried a little about Jake on the way home. He really wasn't looking too good. But then again, he never did. Jake was an odd duck. He'd never fit in at school, didn't have any friends, wasn't too good with the ladies. That was actually an understatement. He'd never had a girlfriend in his life, which is a big part of the problem, I think. I was an odd duck myself, but not on the same level as Jake was. He took it to another place entirely. It was strange the way two perfectly well-adjusted parents could spawn such disaffected progeny. Maybe those theories on genetics were all just a bunch of horse shit. Back at home, laying in bed. Not quite dreaming, but not quite awake. A state of semi-consciousness, dimly aware, darkly sentient. Tracy is making an appearance again. She shows up about once a week, usually when I'm at my lowest. It's the same sad scene. She's in her shorts and running shoes with her hair all wild and tousled, and she's sitting on the couch watching me guardedly, and she's made her decision already. And I'm fighting the urge to kneel before her right there at her feet. Despite the fact it's all I want to do, I'm fighting it with every fiber of my being. Sure, it's what I want, but it's more than that. It's playing out on multiple levels now. I want to prostrate myself before her smug, sated perfection. Beg her to take me back. Tell her I'll be good. I'll be better. I'll be whatever the hell she wants. But she just sits there and glares and says nothing, and I do nothing. I don't genuflect. I don't talk. I just watch. Everyone else is out. The apartment is empty. It's just her and I. No one else is there to witness whatever comes next. She's still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She is liquid, feminine perfection. Nothing else even comes close. She fills my chest up with molten lead. She's going off to med school soon. It's all she wants, all she cares about. She's only told me about a dozen times already. She raises her hand dismissively like Caesar, and my head catches fire, and there's bright bursting light, and now I'm sliding down the tunnel again. Same one as always, slipping and sliding and screaming my lungs out noiselessly, no wind left, and before I know it, I'm at the bottom and Tracy isn't there anymore. Which is good and bad. On the one hand, it's nice because I don't have to watch her sitting there disapproving anymore. But on the other, it's horrible because I can't stand to be parted from her no matter what she's doing to me. I've been dumped out into the parking lot of the apartment complex, that ski chalet place, lying there on the asphalt, sprawling all over the place with the cars going by just a few feet away. Up the big steep hill, the campus looms overhead. It's mid-spring, April or so. There's still some snow on the ground and the icicles are still clinging to the eaves, but we're only a few weeks away from graduation. Crazy-ass northern springs. about 6 weeks away from the end of all things as we know them. In 6 weeks, she'll go away, and so will they, and so will I. And all that will remain are these goddamn flashing images that will go on haunting me from now until the end of time. I wish I'd never gone at all. In the morning, I'm better, though. I barely remember what happened. I usually recover quickly. I guess I'm resilient that way. I go and make coffee, put some bread in the toaster, have a bite to eat. Another day on planet Earth, more present melting into past. What a sorry state of affairs. The weather's nice. Perhaps I'll go for a walk. A walk in the lovely morning sunshine. That's the ticket. Who could say no to that? Maybe I'll go to the movies. I haven't done that in a while. C'est tout.
Thank you, Scott, for giving us a taste of your second novel, Chasing Your Tail. That was fantastic.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'm wondering, where do your characters come from? Are they inspired by your own experiences or encounters with other people, or just purely imaginative?
It really depends on the book. I've written a lot of stuff, a lot of novels, and to take Screwed for an example, they're fictitious. I just sort of invented those guys. They were loosely based on maybe some prototypes, character, personality prototypes from back in Jersey, because that's really like a bit of a tribute to Jersey. But that being said, they were completely fictional. There was no Ralph, there was no Larry. Chasing Your Tail gets a little closer into mixing and mingling. By the time I got to the second third of the book where he flees out to California and tries to escape his own life, I had gotten into nonfiction, autobiography. The first third of Chasing Your Tail is fiction, and then without me trying to do it, it just sort of happened. It became memoirish, and the character became me. It's exactly word for word 100% what happened when I went out to California in my early 20s. So I've sort of got two different categories of books that I do. There are the ones that are just comedy or just for fun or fiction, and then there's a whole sort of suite of them that I've done that are pretty much purely autobiographical. So either or, they either come from real life or they come out of thin air, whatever the mood is.
Interesting. I love to hear how the characters transform and shift and reality and fiction mingle. And
Yeah,
as a reader, you can't really piece it apart. That's really cool.
cool.
I'm also wondering, what was the biggest unexpected challenge that you encountered while writing this book?
Well, Screwed was the easiest. Just to go back, Screwed was the easiest thing I've ever written. It was just funny and dialogue, and I had a blast with it, and it just wrote itself. Chasing Your Tail, I wrote a little later. It wasn't hard to write. There are other things I've written that were a lot harder. I would say the biggest hurdle with that one was probably what I was just talking about a minute ago, where the book sort of started veering off in an unexpected direction. And different authors have different philosophies on this. Some of them will just say, sit down and write, and whatever happens. Some will write from a structured set of notes, different ways of functioning. But by the time I got to the middle of that book, I was going towards autobiography, which I honestly didn't want. I was trying to make up a story there, but I was falling back on old habits, if you want to put it that way. The challenge was really keeping it on track in terms of doing something new and getting away from the memoir stuff, which I'd been doing nonstop for years before that point.
Well, thanks for sharing a bit about your process and for, writing these two books and putting them out into this world.
Sure. Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's nice and easy most of the time.
Well, that wraps up our reading and interview with Silver Bow Publishing author Scott Taylor. You can order these books at your local retail bookstore through Ingram Distribution iPage. You can also purchase Silver Bow books, including Screwed and Chasing Your Tail, which you heard from today, directly from the publisher at silverbowpublishing.com/Scott Taylor. The ebook versions are available on Amazon. So thanks for tuning in. Be sure to pick up your copies of these great new releases and stay tuned to Silverbow Publishing's social media channels to learn more about upcoming books and events.